Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Fourth Quarter Football video, and today I'm going over my Week 12 Power Rankings for the 2023 NFL season. I do Power Rankings on the channel every single week, so if you enjoy it, make sure to tune back next week. This was a interesting week of football. We got a couple teams on bye, but overall there were some really good games and a lot of games that I believe are fairly telling for teams moving forward. So let's get right into it. First off, we have the dumpster fire. This is the category that changes the least every week. We got the Panthers at 32, we have the Patriots at 31, we have the Cardinals at 30, the Giants at 29, and the Bears at 28. Usually I don't have teams go down when they're on bye, but the Patriots did drop this week because the Giants won their game against the Commanders. The Giants have beaten the Commanders twice now this season, so out of their 3 wins, they've beaten the Commanders twice and the Cardinals once, so pretty solid wins, I should say, for the Giants. Overall, none of these teams are very good. They're all pretty bad. The Bears do have Justin Fields back, and they did look pretty good offensively this week with Justin Fields. They put up 26 points. They had a strong showing against one of the best teams in the league. I was tempted to bring the Bears out of the dumpster fire, but I'd like to see them win a game in order to do that. Obviously, a strong performance against one of the best teams in the league is a very strong performance, but I want to see it paired with a win for them to be graduated from the dumpster fire. The Cardinals played an okay game. They had a tough opponent. They lost by a couple scores. Not a couple scores. They lost a close game to Houston. But Houston's a tough team, and they played pretty decently. And the Panthers are the Panthers. They had another poor game. Moving on, we got started off well. We have the Titans at 27, we have the Jets at 26, we have the Falcons at 25, and we have the Commanders at 24. The Titans started off 3-4. They've lost 3 games in a row, and Tennessee has looked pretty bad recently. I thought that Will Levis was going to be a good quarterback. I thought that he looked strong in his first game, and they looked like they're going to be turning the season around. The last 2 weeks, they've looked like one of the worst offenses in the league. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins fantasy football owners are happy because Will Levis is passing to Hopkins significantly more than Ryan Tannehill did. But overall, the Titans' offense has been horrendous. They don't have a running game. Their passing game is okay. And their defense hasn't been playing well either. So the Titans have been really bad recently, and they're gunning towards the dumpster fire. We have the Jets at 26. The Jets are 4-6. They started off 4-3. They've also lost 3 games in a row. And again, they've been horrendous recently. They had some strong games where they played well against Kansas City, and then they beat the Eagles. They were all the way up in the power rankings at I think 14, 15, or 16 at one point. But then after the last 3 weeks, they've just gone back to their old ways. They've been blown out in 2 of their last 3 games. And then this week against Buffalo, they just looked terrible. So yeah, the Jets are very volatile in my rankings because I just don't have any faith in them. And so because they have been playing poorly recently, then they're dropping down to this category. The Falcons have also lost 3 games in a row. They're on bye this week, so they didn't really move much. And then Washington has lost 2 games in a row, but they've lost 3 of their last 4. Both of those teams also started off pretty well, and they are both down in the dumps recently. Moving on, we have the mid-tier. We have the Rams at 23, we have the Packers at 22, we have the Raiders at 21, and we have the Buccaneers at 20. The Rams and the Packers were in the lowest portion of the previous tier last week. They've been kind of following each other since their game. They had a close, tight game against each other where the Packers were able to defeat the Rams, and they've had a similar record since then. So they've been kind of following each other in the rankings. This week, the Packers got a win over the Chargers, and the Rams got a win over the Seahawks, bringing both of these teams to 4 wins on the season. The Packers have been climbing. They're in the dumpster fire for a few weeks, and the Rams fell a little bit, but now they're getting back up there. So now they're both in the low 20s. They're kind of hanging together. Both of them have been very inconsistent on offense. They both started off strong offensively. The Rams have a lot of offensive weapons that have not been utilized recently, and Jordan Love had a very strong start to his career. They both fell off for a while, and then this week is kind of a get-right game. So we'll see what ends up happening with these two, but neither of them look great right now. The Raiders lost this week, but it was a very expected loss. They put up a pretty decent fight, and overall they've been a pretty decent 5-5 team. This week they became 5-6. They lost by 7 to Miami, and they put up a strong fight defensively. Miami had a lot of yards, but didn't put up a lot of points. And the Raiders had a good showing offensively as well. They didn't put up many points, but it was a decent showing. And Tampa had a pretty okay loss this week too, to the 49ers. Tampa was slightly above the Raiders last week, so I'm kind of keeping them at the same. I think that there's an argument the Raiders could be higher, but I have the Tampa at 20 for this week simply because they were higher than them last week. They both lost, so we'll see what happens for the week after. But for right now, I think that it's fair to put them, they're only half a game apart, so I think it's fair to have the Buccaneers a little bit higher just because they've been slightly more consistent and they've had a harder schedule this year. Moving on, we have the Chargers at 19, we have the Colts at 18, we have the Bengals at 17, and we have the Saints at 16. The Chargers this week lost to the Packers. It was a tough game. And it's not the games the Chargers want to be losing right now. The Chargers are around 500 right now. They're below 500. And they're most likely not getting a playoff spot this season. For the third season out of the 4 that Justin Herbert's been in the league. Obviously, their defense is one of the worst defenses in the league, but this week, it wasn't even the defense's fault. The defense only let up, 20 points? It just was a poor team effort all around, and the Chargers just are one of the most inconsistent teams in the entire NFL over the last 4 years. They'll win some phenomenal games, and then they'll lose games. You're like, how is this team even in the same realm as the team that we saw a couple weeks ago? So, right now, the Chargers are 19. I think it's a pretty fair spot for them. I think anywhere from 14 to 20 could be fair for them right now, but I'm having them at 19. At 18, we have the Colts. They were on bye this week, so they didn't really move. Some teams moved around them, though. At 17, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. They lost to the Ravens 34 to 20. Joe Burrow went out with injury, so the Bengals fell significantly because of that injury. They're down to 17. The backup quarterback looked pretty good. In the snaps that he played pretty decently, but we'll see how it ends up happening for the rest of the season. I put them at 17 just tentatively. Once we see how Jake Browning does in the weeks upcoming, then they'll move up or down accordingly, but right now I just wanted to put them somewhere in the middle, and then we can kind of go from there. The Saints are at 16. Obviously, they're on bye this week, so they kind of stayed in the same spot. A couple teams did move above or below them, but they basically stayed in the same spot on bye. Moving on, we have somewhat confused one. This is one of 2 categories that are all of the same tier. All 6 of these teams are the same tier. I just didn't have enough space. So at 16, oops, that's wrong. At 15, we have the Vikings. At 14, we have the Broncos. And at 13, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Sorry about that. The Broncos beat the Vikings this week in a very close matchup, and the Broncos are now on a 4-game winning streak to be 5-5. They started off 1-5, they're now 5-5. And in their recent games, they've beaten the Vikings, they've beaten Buffalo, they've beaten Kansas City Chiefs, and they are cruising. The Broncos don't look unstoppable, but they just look very strong. They're clicking offensively, which they have been all season, but now their defense is starting to help them out a little bit. Overall, I watched most of this game. It looked pretty good. The Vikings obviously have their backup quarterback, Joshua Dobbs. He's looked pretty decent, and they won a lot of games in a row without Justin Jefferson, but I'm curious to see whether or not that's going to be a consistent winning strategy for them. So right now I have the Vikings at 15 with their loss this week. I put the Broncos above them just because they're only half a game apart, and the Broncos have continued their winning streak, and they've both been very impressive winning streaks, but the Broncos do get the advantage just because they did win this week. And then the Steelers are at 13. They lost this week to the Browns. They only dropped 2 spots, which I think is a pretty fair amount to drop them by. And overall, it was a decent game. They played defensively, which is what they always do, but their offense just is not good enough to be consistent. Most likely, the Steelers will finish off 9-8. They'll be a mid team. They won't be a playoff team. They'll probably be somewhere around 15 or 16. But for right now, they're at 13 because they have played very well this season. They're 6-4, and they've had a really tough schedule doing it. Moving on, we have somewhat confused number 2. We have the Seahawks at 12, we have the Bills at 11, and we have the Houston Texans at 10. Seattle had a tough loss this week to the Rams. It was obviously a divisional loss, but they're down to 6-4. And Seattle and Buffalo are officially, in my opinion, the 2 most inconsistent teams in the league. Seattle has won some pretty great games, winning against the Lions, great game. And then this week, losing to the Rams. They've lost to the Rams twice, actually. And they've just been really incredibly inconsistent this year. They'll have some really good offensive games, some really good defensive games, but they don't really have a team identity. They could be a strong contender, but I think that they're just confused right now, and I think that they need to get some form of consistency before they can be a top team. Buffalo also, they're 6-5. They lost last week to Denver, and then this week they demolished the Jets. Buffalo has 2 speeds: losing and beating bad teams by 50. Their one exception was when they beat the Miami Dolphins by 30 instead of a bad team. But yeah, Buffalo has been the most inconsistent team in the league, other than Seattle, just because they'll beat all the bad teams, and then they'll sometimes lose to bad teams, and then I don't know what Buffalo's deal is. Josh Allen has a lot of turnovers, and in the games he doesn't, they win, and in the games he does, they lose. I don't see Buffalo being a serious contender because Josh Allen's going to have a game in the playoffs where he throws a lot of picks. He's basically the Brett Favre of our generation right now, over the last 2 seasons. So I'm very curious to see where Buffalo continues from here, but right now they do not have a consistent way to win games. As for the Houston Texans, they are improving. They're up to 6-4. CJ Stroud's looking better and better every week. This week, obviously, he looked a little worse because he did have 3 interceptions, but it was an easier week. It was against the Cardinals. They cut him some slack, and he still had 300 yards. He still had a pretty good game. He just threw a couple interceptions, but they were able to weather the storm. Houston's been fairly consistent recently, and I think they're going to continue to get better. Moving on to the strong contenders, we have the Dolphins at 9, we have the Jaguars at 8, we have the Cowboys at 7, we have the Niners at 6, and we have the Cleveland Browns at 5. The Dolphins were on bye this week, so yeah, they didn't play any games. They stayed in the same spot because they didn't play any games. Oh, sorry, they played the Raiders. Yeah, they beat the Raiders by 7. But it was fairly a nothing game as far as power rankings are concerned. The Dolphins played a pretty decent game. They could have played better, but it was a fairly nothing game for power rankings. Jaguars, very similar game. They had 34-14 against the Titans. The Titans have been bad recently. The Jaguars played a pretty solid game. They played a better game than Miami did. So they just kind of stayed at 8 and 9 in the power rankings, almost as if it was a bye week. Same thing with the Cowboys and the Niners, honestly. All of these teams, all 5 of the teams here, had pretty average weeks. The Browns had a 3-point win over the Steelers, so they stayed in the same spot. The 49ers had a pretty strong win over Tampa, so they stayed in the same spot. And the Cowboys had a pretty strong win. They stayed in the same spot. All of these teams were against teams they were supposed to beat. They all did it, so they all stayed in the same places. For the most part, this ranking is not necessarily how good I think the teams are. I think the 49ers are the best team here. I think the 49ers are better than Cleveland, but Cleveland did beat the 49ers head-to-head, and Cleveland has been playing better recently. The 49ers beat the Cowboys head-to-head, so that's why they're ahead of them. But I think that Miami, I really don't know what to think about Miami just because they haven't been able to put together a strong game against a good team. And then the Jaguars have been able to do that, but none of the teams here have done that consistently other than Cleveland, which is why Cleveland is in the number 5 spot right now. All of these teams get a lot of wins. They lose to some of the tougher teams, but overall, they're all very strong contenders, and I think that they're all going to have a pretty solid chance at winning the Super Bowl this year. And last but certainly not least, we have the NFL's elite. We have the Eagles at number 1, we have the Ravens at number 2, we have the Lions at number 3, and we have the Kansas City Chiefs at number 4. This category also didn't change this week, mostly because half the teams haven't played yet. They're playing on Monday Night Football. So if Kansas City wins tomorrow, then they'll be put at number 1. The Eagles will be number 2, Ravens will be 3, and the Lions will be 4. But other than that, if the Chiefs lose, they'll stay in the same spot. Like, the Chiefs are the Chiefs are one of the best teams in the league. If they lose to the best team in the league, I'm just going to keep them at number 4. Like, If they win, then they'll be number 1. If they don't, they'll be number 4. The Lions stayed in the same spot this week, and so did the Ravens. They both had pretty significant. They both had pretty strong wins. Obviously, the Lions was a comeback win over the Bears. So there was an argument to be made to put Kansas City at number 3, just straight up. But they got it done, throwing 3 interceptions. It was a pretty solid game. So I'm keeping the Lions at number 3 right now, and the Ravens are staying at number 2. They beat the Bengals. Joe Burrow did get injured, but they beat them by 2 scores. It was a pretty strong game. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.